Maybe? Maybe? Hello. You don't get a kiss. We have computers. We're just gonna have to pipe Tammy in later.
Well, I should tell you too, just so you all know, because it's relevant to what you were talking about. I should tell you what Tammy's doing instead of being here. We went to a monastery in Austria about 6-7 months ago. It was a very cool place, about 800 years old. Absolutely beautiful. These people have been working on making that place beautiful for 800 years. And you can make a place pretty beautiful at 800 years if you really work at it. Anyways, when we were there, the monks were setting up a chapel, and they had hired this guy who paints in the Renaissance style to paint these large pictures, 25 feet high, some of them in the Renaissance style. And when we were there, the teacher of the artist happened to be there, and he was an American, about 75 years old, and he'd started this atelier, which is like an apprenticeship program in Florence, which is the home of the Renaissance, and to continue the Renaissance tradition of drawing and painting, which is not taught in art schools, because actually you don't get taught anything in art schools except postmodern idiocy. I mean that's definitely the case. It's like art schools hate art, just like English departments hate literature, and education faculties hate children. And anyways, Tammy has been interested in pursuing an artistic career for a long time and had interruptions in various ways to that. And we made arrangements for her to go to Florence for 2 weeks to take this course in Renaissance painting and drawing. So if you're an artist and you're a serious artist, there isn't anything better that you could ever possibly imagine doing. And so that's what she's doing. And so that, just so you know, that you didn't get blown off for no reason.
She's painting us a painting.
Right,
in Florence,
exactly.
is what you're saying.
Exactly.
I love it.
So, and
We're
that's an
grateful for
adventure, right? And that's an adventure, that's for sure. So, all right. We
had an adventure yesterday because we went to a website, and the website was understandmyself.com.
Oh yeah, that one.
Has anybody been to that website?
Yeah.
Okay, one person, okay? Now, a couple of things. Number one, everybody needs to go to that website, okay, when we're done here. Big shout out, you'll appreciate that. And we took a test.
Yeah.
Yesterday.
Well, this is really why you're here now.
Yeah.
We need some help. No.
Okay.
You're a doctor, and the truth of the matter is we discovered some things yesterday, and we need some help. So we figured, why not just do it in front of our friend? No, guys, understand myself. Sax. You brought papers?
I came prepared.
Is that his report?
Oh, this is ours.
Oh,
But let's just focus on him for now.
Why'd you bring that? I have all the questions.
This is not really an intervention, but... No.
So really quick, well, we went there, and we're constantly on the move of growing. What can we do to learn? What can we do to learn?
Yeah.
And we were having a day yesterday. Let me rephrase that. I was having a day yesterday, and I talked about it, and it was a frustrating day, and her in her infinite wisdom decided to send me tests, like when I'm like wanting to blow up the whole world.
Yeah.
She's like, you should take this
Teach him
test.
something.
Let's figure this shit out. And I'm like, fuck your test. I don't want anything to do with your test.
Yeah.
I want to be angry right now. So we took this test. I'm being totally serious. This all happened yesterday. I'm not making this shit up. I'll show you the timestamps. And God bless her. Like, I'm melting down. I'm like, dude, I don't know when I'm going to be home. I'm pissed off. I'm going to the gym to work this thing out. And she's like, well, here's this link to this test. You should go take it.
Well,
I took it, and here's my scores and the whole thing. And I'm like, does she not understand what the hell is going on this planet? What were you saying?
Well, first, God told me through a roundabout way to go and listen to this podcast. So I listened to the one that I don't even remember what one, but it is where I found this.
With him and Tammy?
Mm-hmm.
Was where I was talking with Tammy and Michaela?
And Michaela was there.
Michaela.
She was directing it.
Yeah.
Fantastic podcast, by
Great
the way.
podcast, by the way. And so we took this test, and Sax discovered some things in this test.
Yes.
Now, and I wanted to preface this by saying, like, how many of you are in here, just so you can see, how many of you in here are married? Damn near everybody. So we
job.
have a lot of couples, we have a lot of entrepreneurs, we have a lot of business owners, we have a lot of red personalities, we have a ton of go-getters. We don't have a bunch of freaking lethargic idiots in here. Some of them. I mean, there's a couple of you, but
you know who you are.
You know who you are. But the reality is, like, I'd like to believe that a lot of us are operating with the same dynamics and the same frameworks and the same struggles. And that's one of the things I talked about really being drawn to your book and to your videos is you say a lot of great things and quote a lot of the Bible, which I'm very much infatuated with, but the emotion, the reality, the truth. And it's something that I'm very much drawn to, and I truly believe that all of us here are in that same dynamic of wanting to get better, wanting to grow, yes? Wanting to understand the dynamic of the relationship. Why do we keep doing this with the lights, or is that me? We can just leave the lights on or off and leave them there. Thank you.
It's the screen.
Oh, I thought we fixed that. Anyways, next year. So Sax, we took the test yesterday, and Sax asked me if she could ask you a question to kick off. And
sure. Let me just
explain. And I have no idea what
for a sec. So about this test, just so you know, okay? So my former graduate student of mine at Harvard and I put this together with my former graduate advisor from McGill, and we set up a company about 20 years ago, and the rules of the company were to produce high quality, low cost, scalable psychological interventions that had demonstrable utility that didn't do any harm. So those were the rules. And so
that's a mouthful.
We psychologists have worked with early artificial intelligence models to understand how the language we use to describe personality groups. So, turns out if you're a happy person, you're also a talkative person. Happy, talkative people blink more. We don't know why that is. Things clump together in odd ways. If you're sensitive to one negative emotion, you tend to be sensitive to them all. People differ in terms of how agreeable they are. Agreeable people are polite and compassionate, and they defer to other people. Disagreeable people are more harsh and judgmental and competitive. There are conscientious. So we set up this test, and we did some of the basic research on how these personality descriptors clump together, and we produced a report, but then we altered it so that if you go there, you can get a report for yourself to find out just exactly what sort of scum rat you are. And then if your partner does that, they get a report. But then you get a joint report that tells you how you're different and the same and where your conflicts are going to arise. Because you will think that the other person is just being a pain, but it's possible they are. But it's also possible that they're actually different from you. And it's useful to understand their differences because, well, first of all, you can see that you're actually dealing with someone that's different, but you'll also understand to some degree why those differences exist and also what utility they have. So, for example, my wife is less agreeable than me by quite a lot. It's usually the reverse in couples because women are more agreeable than men on average. And so Tammy is hard on people, including me, but she's also a very good judge of character, and she can see snakes way before me. And so her problem is she's more suspicious of people than she might be and loses some opportunities. My problem is that I trust people too easily and I can get tangled up with snakes. And so if we communicate carefully, then we can benefit from that whole range of judgment, and we can come to a much more accurate assessment of what's in front of us. So anyways, that's at understandmyself.com, and it only takes like 20 minutes to do the damn test, and you'll learn a lot about who you are and who your partner is, and then exactly where things are going to be troublesome for you and why. And not as well.
I'm 100% certain she's not here because she and Saxony would basically just skewer us.
Yeah, well.
They would absolutely just lambaste us and rip us to shreds.
I really have a newfound love for her after that podcast. I was like, she's really like tough cookie. I like her.
What do you got? You said you had a question.
So this one is fascinating to me. My darling husband, when it comes to, I don't remember the category, but let's just say this. He's 91st percentile in compassion.
0.
And 0 in politeness.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
0.
Oh, is that right, eh? Oh.
Like 0.
Right. 0 isn't very high.
What's wrong with me?
No.
Well, I would say
You wrote the test. Help us. Help us. Help me.
One of the things that's probably the case in your life is that you say things that hurt other people's feelings, and that really bothers you. So people who are low, so agreeableness, this is the dimension that sort of determines, in some ways it determines how much you're tilted towards bargaining for you versus how much you're tilted towards bargaining on the behalf of someone else. Now, women are more agreeable than men on average across cultures, and that's probably because they have to sacrifice themselves to infants, right? You got to be agreeable if you're going to deal with an infant, right? Because an infant's always right, up till till 6 months of age. No matter what the infant complains about, it's right. Now, that's not true of your husband. Right. Well, and it's also not true of older children. So part of the problem that agreeable women have is that they tend to sacrifice themselves to other people even when they shouldn't. And so, well, that's a problem. Now, agreeableness breaks into two sub-dimensions, and one is politeness and the other is compassion. And compassionate people care for other people, obviously, and polite people, they won't cause verbal conflict. That's one way of looking at it. You'll cause verbal conflict, but you care about other people. That's not a common personality result.
That's a good thing, right?
You have you're complicated in that dimension. Well, it's not a bad thing. It's just a complicated thing because, it's rare that someone would be that high in compassion and simultaneously that low in politeness. So you're a blunt person. You'll say what you have to say. And you'll say what you have to say even if it causes emotional upset, but that'll also come at a price for you, right? So.
Are you that way?
I'm high in compassion and politeness. The only reason that I told you guys this earlier, it's hard for me. I don't like conflict at all. That's why I have conflict. See, I really learned this. I learned this. This is a good thing and I'm an agreeable person. This is a good thing for agreeable people to learn. Conflict deferred is conflict multiplied. So look, I don't want to have a fight with my wife. So if we have a problem, we're going to deal with it right bloody well now because I don't want to have that fight every goddamn day for the rest of my life.
Amen.
Right.
See?
Right. So it's like, let's sort this out. What do you want? What happened here? What went wrong? And not who's to blame. We're both to blame. How can we fix it? That's why you mentioned earlier, when you're sort of mining your past for errors, this is actually the utility in confession. And you can actually learn this. It's actually really useful to figure out how stupid you are. Yes, it is, because then you've got the diagnosis right. You think, oh, look, and you've got to do this in detail. Okay, something didn't work out. What stupid things did I do? Here's 50 of them. I've got them really differentiated, right? I really understand. If you understand how you were stupid, you can fix it. That's the utility of confession. And so if you're fighting with your partner and they can tell you this way you want to listen, and they're not going to be that good at it, it's like, okay, dear, what did I do that was stupid as far as you're concerned? Now, she has to be thinking what she did was, about how what she did was stupid too, but you need to listen because maybe she can tell you how you're stupid, and then you wouldn't have to be stupid anymore. And so, it's a bitter pill to swallow, but you don't have to repeat it. And you can actually, so the goal of the negotiation should be establishment of peace in the future. And so you want to figure out, well, what you did wrong, but then you also jointly want to figure out how you would like it to be different. And you can do that with every single thing in your marriage. That's a joint vision, How would you like everything to go? All the small things that you do continually. They're not small, not at all. You want to put those things in order. And it's possible to do that with careful negotiation, especially if you make it a habit, because the other thing that happens too is people often only try to negotiate when they're angry. And that's hard because when you're angry, you just want to stomp the other person. You want to win. You want to show them how you're right and they're wrong. It's not that helpful if you're married to them. It's like, well, seriously, it's like, what good is it to win an argument with your wife? Like, she's there the next day. So you can't really win the argument. You can't win the argument. Especially not at her expense, especially not continually, because then all that happens is she gets demoralized, and then you end up with someone demoralized. And unless you want that, and if you do, you're an absolute bloody fool, then you don't want to demoralize her. And so then, but you have the fight, but the point of the fight is to come up with a solution, an accurate assessment of the problem and to generate a solution that you're both like thrilled about. It's like, here's a fight we had. How could it have gone differently? Here's a vision of how it could have gone. Oh, I'd love that. It's like, yes, that's what you want. You want to be aiming at how you would have loved it to be. And one of the things Tammy and I learned, when we had little kids, I was getting irritated because Tammy was spending so much time with, it was Michaela, our first child, that she wasn't paying any attention to me, and that's very common. Wives never pay enough attention to their husbands as far as their husbands are concerned.
Amen.
And so, you know, I was complaining about this, and she said, well, why don't we have dates? And I thought, I don't want to have bloody dates. I was dating you, and that's why I got married. I didn't dates, you know, bitch, bitch, bitch. And then I thought, well, that's stupid. It's like, imagine you could have the best date you ever had, or that you ever could have. And I really literally mean, imagine that. It's like, fantasize about that. What would it look like? Well, okay, now let's assume you could have that 3 times a week for the rest of your life. Well, you could. You could. It'd take a lot of negotiation. A lot. It'd take a lot of work. But you could have it. If you could have it if you aim at it. So we started to have dates like 30 years ago. 30 years? 25 years ago. 30 years ago, yeah. Jesus. It's a long time.
You're getting old, man.
Yeah, it's been great. They've just got better and better. You know, I talked to Bill Maher a while back, and Bill said, you know, you can't really get along with someone forever. The love wanes, the sexual attraction disappears, you know. You get, what would you say? You get accustomed to each other. Yeah, but not if you work at it.
Yeah.
You got to work at it, man. You work at it if you're trying to impress someone when you're dating them. It's like, do that with your wife. Maybe it'll work. Maybe she'll like you. Wouldn't that be something?
Did you have any other questions for our therapy session?
No, I think we're doing great. But what I will say is the question I had with those things is, what I love is, like, I trust him because I know that he's not going to be polite necessarily in his delivery.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, what he gives me is truth.
Yeah,
he's really good with truth. And it's like, when we were first together, and we've shared this on our podcast, it was really harsh at first because I've never been with someone who speaks truth, because it's kind of a rare thing, unfortunately. And I realized, like, that politeness, he doesn't want to sugarcoat it. But as time progresses and we go through things, I know whatever he gives me, it's it. And so it cuts out that doubt or that, that negotiation or whatever's going on. It's like, then we just can
It's harsh, but it's not anxiety provoking, eh? Because you see, Tammy's like that too. Like, I know, like, if she delivers judgment on someone, I can trust it. Yeah. Now, it's harsh, but it doesn't matter. I know what she thinks now, you know, and I can, if someone's consistently, what would you say, tough in their judgment, it's easy to adapt to them because it's consistent, right? The rules are stable. And it's actually, I love having disagreeable people around me because they tell you what the hell's going on. Agreeable people, they're always covering everything. It's okay, it's nice. It's like, no, it's not. It's not nice. There are plenty of problems. Canadians are like that. It's like, it's so sickening. It's like we've elevated nice to the highest. As long as you're nice. It's like, as long as you're nice, you can lie, you can cheat, you can steal, you can pretend, you can be willfully blind. Yeah, as long as you're nice. It's like, no.
I'm curious about this. Not the Canadian thing. Because you guys don't have guns and stuff, so whatever. You guys can just borrow ours. But the blunt object, I feel like a blunt object a lot. Guys, yes or no? Sometimes it's like no matter, guys, like ladies, you raised your hand. What the hell? Guys, you feel like a blunt object sometimes. And it's like, I feel like sometimes no matter how I take the approach, no matter what I say, it's like, it's very much received as like that assumption of how I'm going to show up. Does that make sense? And so for me, the constant work is how do I approach things? And something that we've started to uncover more and more and more is my approach matters. How I approach her matters, even being the blunt object. What are some of the things?
Well, you can be sophisticated and blunt, right?
That's what I was leading.
Well, in the Beauty and the Beast movie, that's what that's about. fundamentally. So you have Gaston, right? Gaston in The Beauty and the Beast, and he's a narcissist, and he's all about appearance. And then you have the Beast, and he's kind of a prick, you know, but he's real. And Beauty, who's smart, wants the Beast and not Gaston. And that's every single woman who's ever lived has to make that distinction, because narcissistic, psychopathic men who pretend to be what they aren't, can fool young women with charm and pretense of competence. The psychological literature on that is perfectly clear. And what happens to women as they get wiser is they learn to distinguish the beasts from the psychopaths. And that's it for men. There's beasts and psychopaths. That's all you've got. And so you don't want the psychopaths.
Pretty civil.
You haven't got a chance with them. But you have a chance with the beasts. And the chance you have with the beast is that you can make them sophisticated. And if they're sophisticated, then they still tell the truth, but they can do that with the lightest possible touch, right? It's minimal necessary force. And you can just get better and better at that. You know, and I guess that's one of the advantages I have in being compassionate and polite, is that I'm pretty good at using minimal necessary force. So, but the bluntness is unbelievably useful. If you can ally that with sophistication, it's a deadly combination. That's what happens in Beauty and the Beast, right? Because the Beauty takes the Beast and teaches him to dance and civilizes him fundamentally. And what a woman wants more than anything else is a civilized monster. That's perfect. Well,
yes,
because
ladies,
a monster
yes.
can protect.
Babe.
Yeah. Have you civilized him?
Oh, yeah. I mean, look at the suit.
Yeah, right.
He did this all on his own.
I will say that, like, our dynamic and our marriage, like, it's changed a lot.
Yeah.
It's changed me a lot. And I think it was also a choice. Like, her bringing that to the table, but also me trusting in that. Because there's a lot of...
Bringing what to the table, and what did you trust?
Her ability to hold the space when I am the monster.
Okay. So she doesn't react too much? What happens exactly?
Yeah.
What does she do right?
She'll hold the space for me to be the monster, not judge me in the monster.
Right.
Which, you guys, you understand what I'm saying? Like, the monster shows up and you're like, you don't know how to handle the monster, and she's attacking the monster, and then you feel like you gotta water it down or change it, and this is real. This is who I am.
Oh, I see that. Women do that to their husbands all the time when the husbands are trying to discipline the children.
Yeah.
So I've watched that a lot. Women do not do this. This is a big mistake. So women are going to be protective of their small children. Well, obviously, right? But that doesn't mean children don't need to be disciplined. It doesn't mean they don't need to be challenged. And it doesn't mean they don't need to be played with, and often roughly. And men can discipline and challenge and play roughly. But women have to trust them and leave it the hell alone. So what I see women doing all the time, this is a dreadful thing, is the man, who isn't necessarily very sophisticated, will make some overtures to the young child, so a year and a half, 2 years old, trying to learn what to do with this kid, you know, and play a little roughly and not be perfect at it. And the woman is very nervous about that and skeptical, and then she interferes. And every time the guy tries to have a relationship with the kid, the woman stops it. It's like, you do that 50 times. You punish someone for doing something good 50 times, they won't do it anymore. Then you think, wow, my husband never pays any attention to the kids. It's like, yeah, well, no wonder. Every time he paid any attention to them, you were there, like telling him how he was wrong. That's not a good idea. It's not a good idea. You know, and it's rough. It's rough for women, especially if they haven't had good relationships with men in the past, because it's very hard for women who've had bad relationships with men to tell the monsters from the psychopaths, and so they just assume that it's all psychopath. And that's very hard on good men, because, you know, it's kind of difficult when every overture you make is met with suspicion, right? That's a very, very hard thing to negotiate. It's one of the problems with broken families, because then that starts to cascade. So she trusted you. Why did you trust him?
Here we go.
Because it's daring to trust.
I have questions I'd prefer to ask.
I think truly it's because our relationship started off really interesting, where I was not interested at all. And he was very consistent, but his approach was always, it felt very pure and true. And even from the very beginning, he was very blunt with truth.
So he did both of those. He had a pure and true approach, but he was also blunt.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so that's
sexy. Yeah. That's hot. I got it nailed, man. I'm gonna write a book about this. But carry on.
But I truly believe, as it was the first man that I had met in my life that cared more about truth than my feelings. Because usually my feelings came with some kind of manipulation to like, of all the things, you know, when you're dating. But I was like, wow.
Yeah,
like
if a man tells you he cares about your feelings, he's definitely a psychopath.
See?
And
you just gave a lot of people a lot of out right there.
And to me, it was just like, it was so uncomfortable, but so refreshing. Mm-hmm. And it just worked for me. And, you know, and like I'm saying, in the beginning, it was so uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. But everything in me was like, this is amazing. Except for the parts that I had to look at and be like, wow, what, I'm offended by that. Okay, well, why am I offended by that? Because if that's actually radical truth, that's everything I've ever asked for. So then it actually reflected back on me.
Yeah.
And then I got to become, it gave me more opportunity to become a better person because he's only giving me this very blunt, radical truth. But,
right.
Yeah.
So how do you navigate that, the truth? And obviously, it's a singular thing for me, but it's a real struggle in a lot of relationships that I see. And in talking to a lot of people about, I don't want to offend, I don't want to, cause friction in the relationship. And I hear you guys talk about that a lot. Like for guys that are struggling in that space, specifically, or gals, whoever, with ripping themselves open to that level of truth, that level of vulnerability, because there's a lot of shit that we have that might be scary. Well, there's a lot of past that I have or she has or we have that as you talked about earlier, all right, I'm planting my flag, I'm gonna leave here, lions and live, I'm gonna start telling the friggin' truth. That might open up a waterfall of insanity.
Definitely. Well, it will,
right?
For sure. Definitely.
So share some of that with us.
Well, okay, so one of the things, I have another program called Future Authoring, which is also a very useful thing to do. And it's useful to do jointly. So you might say, well, why bother tolerating the truth? And part of the answer to that is, well, toward what end? It's like, how much could you fight if you knew that the thing you were fighting about you would never fight again about? You know, would you be willing to go at it hammer and tongs for 3 days if you never had to have that damn fight again? And then the reason I'm asking that is because it's like, what's your vision for your marriage? How about playful peace and harmony? That'd be good. And those are very carefully chosen words, by the way. Play. You know, you're a little kid, and you make friends with a girl across the street, and you want to go play with her. You want to go play house. And if you're lucky, she wants to play with you. And you want to play. There isn't anything you want to do more than play. If your relationship is established properly, you play. And play, there's challenge in play, right? I mean, if you're playing one-on-one basketball, you don't pick your 3-year-old nephew that you can just crush into the ground. You know, I win every time. You pick someone that challenges you, and that's what you want in a marriage. And if the challenge is optimized, then it's playful. And you can tell if the challenge is optimized because it's playful. And you want peace and harmony as well. Why peace? Well, you want strife? Then you're an idiot. You maybe want adventure, but you don't want strife. And what about harmony? Well, that's what you get when you listen to music. And you get musical harmony when every note is in the right place. And so that's what you want for your marriage. And you think, well, I'm aiming at peaceful, playful harmony here. And what we're doing isn't working. And so we have to hash it out because that's the goal. Now, if you both know that's the goal that you're pursuing, then you can trust each other. And then you might say, well, so that's like a vision. But the vision can't be vague either. It has to be differentiated. So with this future authoring program, for example, this is you can do this by yourself if you want, but the program helps. It's at selfauthoring.com. So here's a game you can play with yourself. So here's the deal. You can have what you want and need in 5 years, but you have to specify what it is. Okay, so now the next question is, well, how do you specify what it is? And the answer is you do what you did when you were a little kid. You pretend. It's like you fantasize, you daydream. You know, if that's all being beat out of you in school. Don't daydream. It's like you should be daydreaming all the time. Mm-hmm. If you could have the life you wanted, what would it look like? Well, you ask yourself that. You don't tell yourself that. There's a big difference. You ask yourself, well, if I could have it, what would it look like? Write it down stupidly, because you're not going to do that great a job at it. Write it down stupidly. Then do the reverse. If I was the biggest idiot I could possibly imagine myself being, just exactly what sort of hell could I produce for myself in 5 years? And everyone knows, you know, You'd be on the street, you'd be an alcoholic, you'd be a prostitute, you'd be a cocaine addict, or maybe all of those at the same time. So, anyways, it's good to know, eh? So this is the hell you could have if you were maximally stupid, and that's a good thing to think about in your marriage. So I've seen that all the time. So what do you want for marriage hell? How about you spend 10 years in divorce court fighting over your kids while they age and hate you, and you spend every cent you've ever made? How would you like that? And you got about a 30% crack at that, by the way. So maybe that's not a good thing to aim at. So that's a nice hell to avoid. And you both have to have a vision of what you're aiming for in your marriage. Now you do anyways, because every time your husband or your wife does something that isn't in keeping with your unconscious vision, you get pissed off at them. And then they have to guess at what you want, you know, because now they're irritated. You don't know why, and they're not clear enough to tell you, and it's because you stumbled over a vision they don't even know they have, because it's unconscious. Maybe they picked it up from their parents, and no doubt, because, you know, you marry a woman, you marry her mother and her grandmother and her great-grandmother, all the way back to, Eve. And so, make your vision conscious. And then you know you're both working in the same direction. Then you can start to trust each other, you know. Maybe you guys got burnt enough in your previous relationship, so you're after something different this time.
Yeah.
You know, well, it's possible, right? Because you can learn.
Sure.
And so, and if the vision you're aiming at is compelling enough, you'll pay the price of the truth necessary to pursue it. And you can, like, I trust my wife. When we first seriously got together, like, I've known her for 52 years, but when we first seriously got together, I'd learned what I told you earlier about telling the truth. And I said to her, look, you know, I'd like to get married, but you got to tell me the truth. You know, and she agreed to, and she did. She's actually been better at it than me, I would say. Like, I've tried hard to tell her the truth, but I think she's been better at it than me. And it's such a bloody relief to have someone around that tells you the truth. It'll stop you from being insane. You know, and that's a good deal. So you have that shared vision. You know you're working towards a real marriage, you know, a real life. And then you think, well, you can tolerate the friction. You know, if she's upset about something and she's squawky and bitchy about it, I think, well, I'm going to listen to her. Because she won't hit the target very well to begin with either. She kind of wanders around with her accusations and her. That's why you have to listen to women too, is because they have some sense of what it is they're upset about, but not very clear sense. And so you have to listen to them wander around. And what you'll do instead, if you're a man, is you'll offer a solution, and that's great, except you don't know what the problem is. So really, so you have to listen. And she'll wander around, and then you'll find out that 90% of what she's telling you actually isn't a problem, and she'll figure that out too, and then you'll get to the heart of the matter, and then you can offer a solution. But that's a good thing to know, is you gotta have, it's sort of like the space that you've been allowed to be upset. You gotta wander around. And the reason you listen to your wife is because you actually want to figure out what the problem is, and the reason for that is because then you don't have to have the damn problem anymore. So, yeah.
We have, there you go. Everybody go home. We have a lot of entrepreneurs in here. A lot of people with big visions, yes? That's interesting sometimes, having big vision. And not in a negative way, but I know that a lot of struggle that I hear from people, and we don't deal with this. She's like pushing me off the cliff even further to go even bigger, which is something I really love about, like, Grant and Elena Cardone. They talk about that. Like, Elena introduced him, like, to being a billionaire. You guys have heard Grant and Elena's story. He's like, I want to be worth millions of dollars. She's like, no, I want you to be a billionaire. And she's like pushed him into that space. But it's a really interesting dynamic, because if you haven't established a relationship of trust, and he's out here trying to shoot the entire herd of buffalo, it causes a lot of friction. What would you say, or what would you suggest to the men, the big dreamers, the big visionaries, about connecting with their wife, connecting on that vision?
Yeah, well, I would say this
That's
to
a great question,
to both
by the way.
people. To both people. Okay, so here's something men will do. Imagine you've married your guy and you're kind of uncertain, and maybe you've punched above your weight a bit, and your wife is kind of attractive, and in your worst moments, that makes you doubtful about your own suitability for her and about your own attractiveness, and it makes you jealous. Okay, so then your wife, who's kind of attractive, she goes out and buys some nice clothes, and you're going to go out, and she puts on a nice outfit, and she's looking pretty good, and you're a little upset about that, because what if other guys look at her? And so then she comes and says, how do you think I look in this, dear? And she's pretty happy, and maybe she's she's done something a little daring, and the jealous part of you gets the upper hand, and you know, you either don't pay attention or you say something rude. Now, here's something to know. I'm going to tell you how to starve a dog to death. Okay? So this is how you starve a dog to death. If it's hungry and it approaches its food dish, all you have to do is hit it on the nose with the newspaper. And if you do that 50 times, the dog will stop eating and die. Okay? If you do that to your wife 50 times, she will let herself go. Right, and then 3 years down the road, you'll go, geez, you know, you were so attractive 3 years ago. It's like you really let yourself go. What the hell happened? And the answer is, you got exactly what you were aiming for. And so then I would say, well, wives with your husbands, like, they're going to have an ambition, you know, and maybe there's some inconvenience associated with that. Maybe he's gone a little bit more than you want him to be. Maybe you're jealous about whatever the hell he might be doing out on the road, etc. Maybe you're upset because if he's aiming at something high, that puts a responsibility on you. So you just get in the way a little bit every goddamn day. And then, yeah, right.
That's
every
not a little
day,
bit.
man, every day. I call that the 20-year lean. That's right. Just an ounce a day, dear, for 20 years. It's like you'll be all bent over by the end of that period of time. It's like you look around. You look around. You watch the people in your life. When they're doing something you want them to do not punish them, because they'll stop doing it, and then you'll get exactly what you deserve. You watch instead. You watch that person, even if they're not doing it that well, you think, man, they're going in a good direction. And you think, at least, this is what Marge Simpson said to Homer when he accomplished something quite great. She said, I help by not objecting too much. It's like, at least you can do that. Don't get in the way. And maybe you could do something even more, which is to say, hey, have at her. You know, you watch your partner aim at something. They're kind of desperately pursuing a dream, and they're doubtful about whether or not they're the sort of creature that could pull it off. And you come along because you love them, and you say, hey, babe, you want to go to Florence and study art at an atelier? Have at her, man. I'd love to see what you could do. You know, and if you do that, if that's your aim, I'd love, you know, here's what happens. Here's what happens when you fall in love. You need to know this. This is what happens. Most of the time when you look at the world, you look at your memory. Now, a great artist will come along and paint a picture of a rose, and you'll look at the painting and you'll think, oh yeah, that's what a rose looks like. Because you're busy with your life, and you walk by the flowers, and you don't stop to smell them, and they've disappeared for you. And a great artist will remind you what's there. When you fall in love with someone, you fall in love with who they could be if they were the best they could be. You get to see that. That's what that love is, that falling in love. It's like you get to see who that person could be. And it's a gift. It's like a gift from fate. It's a gift from God. You don't get to keep that. You get a glimpse of it. And then it's up to you to realize that in your life. And you could do that. And then you'd have that person you loved. Right? That's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to do. It's a very hard thing not to do too, though, because then you don't get it. And the other person, that person that could be there, if you loved them enough, that person doesn't get to come into existence. And so you can risk that, you know. You ought to be attentive, though. And you can do that with your kids, too. Everybody around you. You can do that. You own a business. You can do that with your employees. You watch them. You see when they do something good. You say, hey, I saw that. You could do that again. Man, I tell you, people will love you if you do that. If you just spend the rest of your life doing this, you watch people, and every time they do something good, they sneak something good out, you say, ha, I saw that. Here's what you did. Pat, pat. I used to do that with my students. They'd hand in an essay, the first essay, and it just usually was bloody, dismal, wretched piece of writing. First of all, half of them were testing me out to see if I cared, so they'd just hand in any old garbage because then they wouldn't have to concentrate on the course. And then the other half of them were trying to guess what I wanted and, you know, sending me cliches of all sorts. But now and then, in among all that utter tripe, there'd be a sentence where the person dared to actually say something they thought. And I'd circle it and say, you know, this is all lies and bullshit and cliches and just dull lies, all of it. But here, you dared to let yourself shine through. And the next essay would be like 40% that. And if I did it again, the third essay would be 100% that. And you can do that with everyone in your life, including you. You know, it's a good thing to learn to do to yourself is, you know, you're not good for much and you stumble along stupidly and you're doing everything like subpar, but now and then you do something slightly better than you did before. That's a good time to notice that and think, you know, compound interest, you're 0.1% better this week than you were last week. You do that for 5 years, man, you are a new man. And there's no end to that. There's no end to up. There's no end to down, you know, and that's terrifying, but there's also no end to up. And so you need to extend to yourself the same benefit of the doubt. If you see yourself, because you know what you do is you take a stumbling step forward and then, you know, your evil superego gets a hold of you and said, yeah, well, you still got a long way to go. It's like, that's not the right response. The right response is, well, you're slightly less stupid than you were. You know, congratulations. And you want to extend your partner that courtesy. You know, so I said earlier, if you're having an argument, you think, okay, what do I want from this person? What do I want them to say? And then maybe you can get them to do it, just sort of falsely. Just act this out for me. Just say these words. And it's a stupid, fragmented, flawed, stumbling partly in the right direction. But really, you do that 50 times, man, you're an expert at it. You can do this with dates. I get couples to come to my therapy sessions, you know, and they just hated each other, but they'd rather not be divorced. And I'd say, well, why don't you go and see a movie? It's like, we haven't seen a movie for 5 years. We're not going to have a good time. And so then they'd go to the movie, and they'd come back, and they'd tell me what a brutal time they had, and they were both happy about that, because they're, you know, showing the stupid therapist just how dismal the situation really was. And I said, look, if you start having dates, assume, okay, we can do the math. 2 dates a week, it's 100 a year. You're going to be married for 30 years, 3,000 dates, let's say. And maybe it's 4,500 because you can maybe have 3 a week if you're like completely bloody fortunate, but you could aim at that. But let's say 3,000. So you're going to have 3,000 occasions to have a romantic time with your partner. That's your life, 3,000 times. Well, maybe the first 100 times could be not very good. Then you got 2,900 times after that. Right? So you gotta have that allowance to let yourself be kind of stupid and exploratory and just kind of barely get it right and see what worked and then just improve it a bit. But when you know hey, if you get it right after 100 times, you got 2,900 times where it's perfect. Well, Jesus, that's a good deal. That's worth some work. Really, that's worth some work. So, vision, and then allowance for incremental improvement and judicious reward. Watch your person and see when they're doing something better. It's like, hey, I saw that. Great. More. They'll love you. They'll love you for that.
I'm curious, what's your favorite date with Tammy? What's your favorite thing to do together?
We dance.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I'll show you a trick. You want to see a trick?
I'm not good at dancing.
Oh, yes.
I learned this in Nashville. You guys all need to know this trick, especially the men. Come here up here.
Here we go.
So imagine we're dancing.
Yep.
Okay, put up your hands. Okay, now push on my hands. Okay, now watch. See?
Uh-huh. Is this dancing?
That's dancing. Now push. You got to push though. See, now I can guide you everywhere. Now watch. See? Yeah, exactly.
I told you I'm not a very good dancer.
Yeah, that was
you
good.
Didn't turn.
That was perfect, though. You got that spin right away. So look, that's a form of play too, right? Because when you're pushing, I learned this from a woman who is a professional dancer in Nashville. So I like Nashville a lot. I went down to Nashville, and I went to the Legion Hall, and I was dancing with Tammy, and this woman who had watched my videos came up and said, "Do you want a dance lesson?" And she said, "I'm a professional dancer." And I thought, hey, sure, why not? And she showed me this trick with pushing. And with pushing like that, you can see exactly what your partner's doing, and you can learn to be unbelievably good at that. And that's ridiculously fun. And if you understand that dancing is foreplay, then now you'll enjoy it. Right? So, right. No, but that's worth thinking about, man. Because it's something you can do for hours. Right. And there's lots of other things you probably can't do for hours. Right. Yeah. But you could do that for hours, and you'll make your wife very happy if you do that, and it's ridiculously fun, especially if it's aligned with music that you really like, and you can get very good at that very quickly. It's ridiculously fun. So we dance 3 times a week, and so it's really fun, and we've got quite good at it, and plus we're getting better at it. It's ridiculously fun.
That's so fun.
You guys dance? Lots of people in here dance. That's
a
lot of foreplay.
Exactly.
Yes.
Well,
so the next question I have then is...
Let's say, okay, so here's the deal. 15% of your life could be high-quality foreplay. Right. That'd be a good deal. Right. That'd be a good deal if you could manage it. And you could manage it.
Oh, I can manage it. I can manage it.
Yeah.
I'm curious. I struggle with the ego of vulnerability sometimes. And I think probably a lot of guys would understand this. There's the aspect of looking at the pride, who I am, what I am, like thinking of this softness as being this vulnerable thing. And this is one of the things you asked about what she's done to me and me being able to be vulnerable and be open is she's allowed me the space to do that. And I feel safe. There's never been the mockery. There's never been the, oh, that was cheesy, whatever. Yeah. We men struggle with vulnerability. Yes or no? Yes. And I find more and more, like as I talk to people, and I'm sure you've talked to thousands of people about this dynamic of the woman wanting this vulnerability, wanting this openness, and it being very ego-driven that we don't. I spent years and years there.
It's also the case that it's very frequently the case that men will manifest vulnerability, which is hypothetically what women want, and then be brutally and immediately punished for it.
Right.
So, but it's subtle, because you can imagine this. This is a good way of thinking about it. There is a difference, and women pick up on this very quickly. There's a difference between accidental vulnerability and purposeful vulnerability, right? And accidental vulnerability, it's tight and it's tough and it's a tight distinction, but accidental vulnerability in some ways makes you into a child, but purposeful vulnerability makes you into someone who dares to confront their own inadequacy and, what would you say, mortality. And then that's not weak, that's strong. Right? That's what it's the purposeful part of it. And you can be, see, this is what you learned in part. You told me a lot in that 10-minute discussion we had before I went on stage. That was extremely useful. You know, you said you took that risk when you made that first video just to say what was true. Okay, that wasn't accidental vulnerability. There was nothing victim-y about it, right? You decided to take it on voluntarily. Yeah, and so if you're a man and you're trying to figure out how to communicate vulnerability, goddamn new age words, you know, to your wife, the degree to which you can do that purposefully is going to be associated with how well it's received, right? So
what would you say to men that struggle with that? What would be a tip, 2 tips, whatever, like something conscious that we carnal?
I think the best, what you try to do to deal with anything that's complex. You talked about Kathy Newman, the woman who interviewed me on Channel 4. Yeah, okay. So I've been in situations many times where I've been talking to journalists who are very well practiced. This is particularly the case with a certain type of female British journalist, as it turns out, because the Brits have a very vicious press, and the women seem to have mastered that more than the men even. And the entire conversation will be aimed at one thing. So these will be like a 2-hour conversation. The goal of the conversation is so that the interviewer can trap the person they're interviewing into saying something foolish and impulsive that will ruin their reputation for the rest of their life, right? And that'll be a hit, it'll produce all sorts of views, and it'll be like a feather in the cap for the journalist. There's a woman, Nellie Bowles, who used to work for the New New York Times. And she did a hit piece on me for the New York Times. And then she later wrote a mea culpa. She wrote an apology to all the people she had written hit pieces on. You can look this up. And she said that she consciously, to promote her career, would put the people she interviewed in awkward and terrible positions to trap them into saying something stupid so they would destroy their lives so that it would make her more famous. Right. So those are tricky situations. What do you do in a tricky situation? Well, if the situation's tricky enough, you're not going to calculate your way through it. You can forget about that, especially if you're dealing with someone who is particularly good at being devious. Because if you ever meet someone who's really good at that, they are way better at being devious than you are at detecting it, because they've been practicing for decades, and some people get expert. And so you might say, well, how do you defend yourself? And that's very straightforward. You tell the truth. And so with regards to vulnerability, what's the strategy for dealing with vulnerability? It's very straightforward. You just say what you have to say as clearly as you possibly can. You know, so if you're upset about something, you say, here's how I'm feeling, and this is why I think it is. No, and it can't be manipulative, it can't be instrumental, it can't be for any other reason except to just hit the damn target right. And if you do that, there is nothing better that you can do if you're communicating with your wife than that. That doesn't mean it'll work. It just means it'll work better than anything else you could have possibly done. And I would say it is the strategy that will work best over time if she's also operating in good faith. You know, and if she isn't, well, you better discover that. You know?
Because I feel like this is guys, real talk. Like, how many of you struggle with this? Struggle with the vulnerable conversation? A lot of men do. Raise your hands. Look, damn near every man in here. It's a struggle. It's a challenge. It's our ego.
Men are often also afraid of emotion-provoking conversations because they're also afraid that they'll lose control of their tempers. And you know, women hit men more than men hit women by a large margin. So, but it doesn't really matter. And I'm not being smart about that. Like, even a pretty strong woman really can't do much damage to a man if she hits him. You know, if she knifes him, yeah, that can be a problem. But
we use guns here in America.
Yeah,
it's a gun problem
or
in
shoots
America.
him, that can be a problem. But just hitting him, yeah, it's not that big a problem. But if a man gets angry and hits a woman, that's not good. And so men are afraid that if a conversation gets emotional and they lose control of their temper, there'll be trouble. And, you know, women have to understand this about men, too, because, and this is something that's very different between men and women, men always know when they're talking to other men that they might get punched. Well, that's right. You know that. It's like, say the wrong stupid thing and see what happens. And if the guy won't punch you, if you've said the wrong stupid thing, then he's kind of contemptible. Right? And so that's always regulating male conversation. Well, you don't have that with women because that just can't be a possibility. And so men will often disengage from an emotion-provoking conversation because they're afraid that they'll get goaded into doing something stupid. You know, and careless women will also goad them that way, which is also not a very wise thing to do. So part of it is fear of vulnerability, let's say, but part of it is also fear of the emotions that can start to rise. Because you know this, those of you who are married or in any relationship, it's a virtually non-existent couple that doesn't have serious arguments in their marriage. And serious arguments, they're dangerous, right? Because you're on the edge in a serious argument. It's touchy. And it's easy for men to think, geez, I'm just not going there. And no wonder. But it's an impediment to communication. So that's another reason it's harder for men to have emotional conversations.
So question for you then, because this is something that comes up a lot, that this is a common struggle. So what is the approach to being able to get a man to be more comfortable, to be vulnerable as his wife and get, you know, like, is this just, like, what steps or what tools do people have to where they can get closer without maybe it happening in a time of conflict or where it doesn't get elevated? Like, are there steps or tools that you give?
Well, I know a good tool for listening. There aren't a lot of good psychological techniques, you know, because communication is so complex, it's hard to reduce it to a technique. But I know a good strategy for listening. This is extremely useful, you know. So imagine you're trying to have you're trying to sort out a problem with your wife. Maybe it's a financial problem, something that's actually, a real problem that you got to, or how to discipline a kid, or, a really complicated problem. You want to express your assessment of the situation and your idea about what might be how it might be addressed, and you want your wife to do the same thing. Okay, how can you facilitate that? Well, you can listen to her. Well, how can you listen to her, and how can you signal that? Well, this is a very effective way of listening. So if we were discussing a problem, I would listen to you until you were done, and then I'd say, okay, as far as I can tell, this is what you said. Do you agree? Okay, you do this if you're a therapist constantly. You listen to people, maybe they'll tell you something for like an hour, and you say, okay, I think I followed that. Here's the gist of what you just said, like the important points, right? And then you got to say, well, did I get that right? Well, this is a very useful thing to do in conversations with anyone, by the way, but it's particularly useful in a marriage. It's like, have I got what you said right? Doesn't mean I agree with it. I just want to make bloody sure I've got the argument. Well, first of all, the first thing you'll find, Carl Rogers figured this out, is that the person's so damn happy that you actually listen to them that they're like half as upset with you as they were just because you managed that. Really. And the other thing, too, you'll find is that if you listen like that, you let the person spin about, because they're upset, and you hear it out, what they'll also find out is that they don't even mean 80% of what they said, but they won't know that till they actually say it. So if you can detach, let the description take place, and also summarize it, then the person has a chance to hear themselves in their own stupidity and to sort it out themselves. And so that's another.
That's really hard to do, because she says a lot of really dumb things. And I really want to stop her mid-sentence and say, no, you're out to lunch here.
Yeah. It's something, it's very hard for therapists to learn this. If the person doesn't come to the conclusion on their own, they won't remember it. Right? So you might say, you listen to someone, you think, yeah, I know what your problem is. I can just tell you, I can tell. It's like, doesn't matter, because it doesn't matter if you bloody well know what their problem is. It matters that they do. And they have to go through all the terrible stumbling steps to get the problem right before they understand it. It's those stumbling steps is the understanding. And you know that with kids, when you're listening to little kids and they're telling you about something, you can't just offer them the damn solution. You have to let them work through the problem. And if they work through the problem, well, then they've come to the solution. And it does take patience, right? Especially if you think you know the answer. But you might know the answer. You might know the answer to the wrong problem, right? That's why you have to listen. Yeah, again, as a clinician, one of the things you learn is a huge part of what you're trying to do is diagnose. It's like, what the hell's the problem? Well, the problem they come to you with might have absolutely nothing to do with the actual problem. This happens in marital disputes all the time. And you'll see this, your wife, your husband, they'll be upset about something. You'll think, Jesus, what the hell did they get so upset about that? It seems like nothing. It seems like nothing. And then you find out it sort of reminds your wife of something that her dad did to her mother like when they were 7. And it takes like an hour before you find that out. Really, I'm dead serious about that. It happens all the time. It's like you triggered something, you reminded them of something, there's some complex there, that's what the psychoanalysts discussed it, but unless the person spins around what they're upset about, they'll never find out what it's actually about. When Freud had clients come to his office, Freud established this technique. He used this free association technique. It's like, okay, you're upset about something. This is another good thing to do with your wife or your husband. It's like, you're upset about something. Okay, what does that remind you of? What memory does that bring to mind? And the person has to sit and watch. It's like, oh, it reminds me of this. And it reminds me of this. It's like, well, that's a clue. And maybe you get a childhood memory. Or a memory of some movie you watched. It's like the person is starting to put pictures together of what the problem landscape is. And then they're doing that. They get more and more precise as they're doing it until they specify the problem completely. And then usually the problem's much smaller than they thought to begin with, and it's much more tightly specified. And once that happens, it's much easier to come up with a solution too. But you have to put up with that circumambulation, that wandering around. That's thinking. That's what that is. It's thinking. It's very annoying. So it is, it's very annoying. Get to the point. So I don't know what the point is. Right. When you're, here's another clue. When you're upset, you do not know what the point is. That's why you're upset. Right? If you knew what the point was, you wouldn't be upset. You wouldn't have to be. If you knew what the point was, you'd know what to do, and you'd do it, and it would have just worked. So whenever you get upset, it's because you don't know what the point is. Then you got to wander around and sort it out. And then you have to be patient enough to let that happen. And you might think, well, why be patient enough? And the answer is, so it doesn't have to happen again. Because you can get to the bottom of things. It's like surgery. It's not pretty. It's not pretty. Jesus, God only knows what you'll find at the bottom of a problem. And it's almost always the case if you're talking about a serious problem, the person who has the problem will get angry and push you away. That'll be one of the tricks. And at some point, they'll cry. And that's when they cry, and it's not cries of anger, right? When they cry, that crying, it's like a reversion to almost like infancy. It's the precursor to learning. And who wants that? People defend like that against mad. I don't want to talk about this till I cry. Well, no bloody wonder you don't want to do that. But you might have to. Probably you have to. Well, nobody wants that. But, fair enough. But like I said, you want to have the same bloody fight forever? Because that's what will happen otherwise. Because if you don't solve the problem, it won't go away. So that's brutal. Same damn fight every day for 30 years. Oh my God, that's so awful.
I've got a question for you about kids. We have 5 kids. We have multiplied and replenished the earth. And, yep. How many kids, how many parents in here? We've got kids.
Oh yeah.
There's a war in the family. We talked about this a minute back there. One of the kids, like one of the things that I don't know that, we struggle with this a little bit. We did initially when we first got together is like the parenting, but the how much. Mm-hmm. How much do we share? How much do we talk about life and things and the sheltering and things like that? I get asked that frequently. Mm-hmm. Like, do you involve kids in what you're doing? Like, do you let them see you, quote unquote, fight? Do you let them in, the world and what's going on? My opinion and my belief system has always been like, we're all in. Yeah. Like, we don't hide stuff from our kids. We don't shelter stuff from our kids. We don't pretend that everything's rosy if it's not. Yeah. We're obviously not dragging each other out by our hair. Right. In front of the kids. What are your thoughts on that?
Well,
not the dragging out.
If you don't let your kids see you fight, then kids think that you can't fight. Mm-hmm. Well, what your kids really want to see is that you fight and make up. That's what they want to see. If you fight and make up, then you had a problem and you solved it. And then the kids, what are you going to tell your kids? There's no problems. It's like, yeah, right. There's plenty of problems. I mean, part of the reason couples fight is because life is really hard. And so, life will throw a problem at the two of you, and you actually don't know how to deal with it. And one of you thinks one thing and the other thinks the other, and neither of you know who's right. And so you got to fight about it because you don't know who's right. How much should you discipline your brattiest kid? Well, you don't know. And you're going to have a difference of opinion. And so that's going to take some tension. The kids have to see you fight. They have to see you negotiate. What you want them to see is you want them to see you negotiate, even with intense emotion, solve the problem and come back together, because then the kids know too that they can come to you with a bloody problem, right? And you'll be able to tolerate the stress and it won't blow the relationship apart. So you don't have to hide that from your kids. That doesn't mean you shouldn't have any privacy and that, the kids should have access to all parts of your life. It's like, use your head. You guys can figure that out. But you don't have to be afraid of fighting in front of your kids. You have to be afraid of fighting stupidly in front of your kids and never solving the problem, right? It's fine for them. Our kids, Tammy and I would, if we have a problem, we just have a fight about it and we sort it out. And the kids just got used to that. And it really did, it's not like they enjoyed it or anything, but it didn't scare them because they had seen 50 times that we resolved it. And then that made them comfortable. That made them comfortable with conflict per se. That's very helpful because Jesus, thinking is conflictual. This is what the people who refuse to allow offensive speech to occur don't understand. You know, like if you're thinking privately, you're offending yourself. If you have any bloody sense, right, you have a hypothesis. You think things should be this way. If you have any sense at all, you generate a counter-hypothesis in your own imagination. You try to beat the hell out of your idea and see if it can take the stress. That's thinking. You do the same thing in dialogue. You do the same thing with your wife. Jesus, you should have a rough conversation about how you're going to structure your finances. That should be a rough conversation. It's like, that's a hard problem. What do we do with our money? Do we have a joint bank account? How much money should we each spend per week or per month? And the usual answer that couples have to that is, well, we don't want to have that conversation. So then they do unconscious, blind, stupid, unplanned, non-strategic things for like 3 decades. Right, well, that's just stupid. It's like, why don't you have a fight for a week about your money? Then you won't have to go to divorce court and have a fight about it for 10 years while the lawyers take all of it. Because it's obviously hard to get your finances straight when you live with someone else. Like, what if you make twice as much as your wife? How much money should you get to spend? How much money should she get to spend? How much do you spend on the family? How much do you get to spend privately without telling your partner? Any? Should you have a separate bank account too? Is it 50-50 regardless of how much each of you make? I mean, there's no answers to these questions. You have to fight it out. You have to negotiate it. And these are hard questions. You know, he's like, well, what do you mean I shouldn't have any money to myself? Well, why do you need private money? Why shouldn't I know what you spend your money on? Well, I'd like to have some privacy. Well, what are you doing when you have that privacy? Well, you know, who's right in that conversation, right? You can see that there's intelligent things to be said on both sides of that. And what's the right answer? The right answer is the answer that you both negotiate towards and will accept voluntarily. That's the right answer. And you're not going to get to that without some conflict. Oh my God. Especially on the financial front. And practically as well, the other thing, this is worth knowing too. I learned this from watching couples for a long time. So imagine you want to have 2 dates a week or 1 date a week or 3 dates a week where you have like a nice romantic adventurous time with your partner. Okay, what's the preconditions for that? Here's one. If you want to have a date with your wife, you have better have talked to her for 90 minutes that week. Because she's going to have a fair number of problems that are associated with your relationship and the household that need to be sorted out before she's going to be able to play with you. And if you don't take that time to discuss the practicalities of the relationship and the household, well, then it's just going to interfere when you try to have some private time together. And it's about 90 minutes a week. That's been my observation, is you got to spend 90 minutes a week with each other just talking about how complicated life is and what you should do about it. And you might say, well, I don't have that much time. It's like, fine. Like I said, have the discussions in divorce court. Because there's no way out of it. You're either going to talk it through or you're going to ignore it. And if you ignore it, it's not like the problems are going to go away. So you might as well just have the business meeting, 90 minutes a week. And maybe you have to involve your kids, you know, when they're old enough. And if you have that, well, then maybe you can have some time together that's just fun. That's just play. But it's 90 minutes, man. You're going to put it in one way or another.
How do you make...
1 second. I just want to say, if you guys haven't read 12 Rules for Life, the chapter on parenting is my absolute favorite. She
references that all the time.
All the time. It's just nails it. So
yeah, it's a good rule.
It's a great rule.
Yeah, well, the rule is do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. And I really like that rule because people hate that rule. And the reason for that is they think, oh, I could never dislike my children. It's like, have you met your children? Everyone dislikes them. So, but to be realistic, like, look, you know, you're warped and demented, and you're probably going to discipline your children wrong, and so is your wife. But if you stick the two of you together, you're kind of one half sane person. And if your brat annoys both of you, he's probably a miserable little wretch, and you should stop him, because if you don't, he won't have any friends. Right, seriously. And so if your kid's annoying you, well, you might just be a prick, but if he's annoying you and your wife, then he's probably annoying. And then if you loved him, you'd stop him, because what, you want your kid to be annoying? You want to not be able to take your kid to a restaurant? Then you don't get to go to a restaurant. And maybe you want to go to a restaurant now and then. Now you can't take your screeching brat. So do you think you like your screeching brat? Oh, of course I like him. It's like, no, you don't. No, you don't. And you will, I've seen parents do this. It's like they smile and, at their child when they should be stopping them. And then half an hour later, like the parent's seething away, but they won't admit it. And half an hour later, maybe the kid's worked really hard on a drawing, and is investigating, learning how to be skilled at drawing. And the kid's forgotten about the damn fight and runs into the kitchen to show mom or dad the drawing, and the parent's still seething away. And the kid shows the parent the drawing, and they go, oh, that's nice. It's like, well, that's the end of that. And you didn't look at the damn drawing. You didn't notice the kid's trying to develop a skill. You didn't give them the feedback you should have because you hated the little wretch because you didn't say anything when you should have. And you pretended you were better than you are, and you're not. And now you missed an opportunity and you punished them for doing something good. And then you're justifying that by saying, well, I never say harsh words to my kid. It's like, that's because you're an idiot. Really, man, I mean it. And I see people do this too. I know what, here's your job as a parent. It's very straightforward. Your job is to take your young child, and by the age of 4, to help them regulate themselves well enough so that other people are thrilled to have them around, right? Because then they have friends. And there's nothing more wretched than a child without friends. And not only is there not anything more wretched, the child falls further and further behind. Because from 4 onward, the primary agents of socialization for children are other children. And so if other children don't like your kids, they're done by 4. There's no way back. So if your child is misbehaving in a way that makes them undesirable on the social front, your responsibility is to correct that. And you can rely on your own intuitions if you have a partner, because you can say to your wife, is that varmint bugging you? And she'll go, well, yeah, he is. It's okay. So my son, Julian, he was a tough little rat. And he was a disagreeable kid. He's very competitive and very tough-minded. And when he was little, now and then he'd have a showdown quite often with us, because my daughter, I could just point my finger at her when she was misbehaving and she'd quit. But my son, that was like stage 1 in a 10-stage battle. He was just getting warmed up. That was just fun. And so now and then he would start to get too misbehaving, and I'd talk to Tammy and say, okay, man, that kid gets away with nothing for the next 2 weeks. Every time he deviates from the straight line 1 centimeter, we're going to tap him back. And we do that together, and every time we did this was so cool to see, he liked us better. Mm-hmm. And why? I'll tell you why. Because we were paying attention to him. Mm-hmm. And there is no difference between attention and love. Mm-hmm. They are the same thing. You think, why are people so desperate for attention? Attention, man, that's the universal currency. And the reason we're desperate for attention is because there's no difference between attention and love. And a child will do anything for attention, right? Yeah. Anything, right? They'll cut their breasts off, right? They'll do anything. So pay attention, right? And help your child become, we used to take our kids out to restaurants when they were little. And I noticed, when Tam had little kids, she'd go to a restaurant alone with the little kids, and the waiting staff would always mistreat her. It was really annoying to see. And then I realized it was because they were afraid to have the toddlers in the restaurant, because they'd afraid they'd run around and disrupt, the whole restaurant, which toddlers often do. And that was hard on Tammy, because she wasn't being treated with the sort of respect she should be being treated by, because she's a mother. But we made sure our kids behaved at restaurants. Now, when they were little, you can only take them to a restaurant for like 45 minutes, because they're like, 18 months old. It's like, how the hell long do you think they can regulate their behavior? It's not like 2 hours, but they can manage 45 minutes. And virtually every time we took our little kids out to restaurants and they behaved, people would come over and give the kids a pat and tell them how well they did. And so just think about how good that is for your kids, eh? How wonderful that is. You take them out in public and perfect strangers come over and smile at them. Well, that's the life you want for your child. Mm-hmm. right? You want them to have their behavior regulated so well that people think they're charming. Teach them some manners. Teach them how to shake hands. Teach them how to look in a person's eyes when they shake hands, you know. Teach them how to stand up properly and to pay attention to adults and to take turns, and then everyone will like them. And then everywhere they go, people will like them. What a deal. And if all you have to do to get that is to put in some disciplinary routines, you know, who loses? And then you like your kids. It's not that hard. And the alternative is brutal.
So true. Oh, Piercy's clapping.
My kids are clapping at that one. My kids are all right up here, so I'm just sitting here like making sure they understand that's why I was the way that I was. You know what I'm saying? I'll let you bring it home, babe, but I have one more question that I want to ask you. Sax is my best friend, and I never knew what that dynamic was until we got together.
Oh, yeah.
And I had always lived in this, my life, your life, my things, my enjoyment, my hobbies, passions, whatever. And, you know, I can truly say that. And I don't know if that makes a lot of sense to a lot of people, because I still see in a lot of the dynamics around other relationships that it's like we're cohabitating, we're married, we're here, but we're not best friends.
Yeah. We're not playing.
Are you best friends?
Well, I was
best
fortunate
friends with Tammy?
because, well, Tammy was a childhood friend of mine. So I've known her since she was 8. She lived across the street from me in this little town we grew up in. And we were friends. And I liked to play with Tammy a lot. And, you know, we were good friends until we were about 12. And I had skipped a grade. So I was in her class, but I'd skipped a grade. And, you know, girls mature faster than boys. And so when she hit about 13, we kind of went our separate ways for a while. But we were good friends. And that's been there all along. And when we're operating optimally together, we're very, very good friends. And so here this is a good hint. This took me a long time to figure out, because I'd studied power dynamics and totalitarianism for a long time. And I was always curious. I knew there was evil, you know, there's tyrannical evil. And I knew the opposite of that was good, because the opposite of tyrannical evil is good. But I didn't know what the opposite was. It wasn't easy to conceptualize, you know. But the opposite of tyrannical evil is play. Okay, so this is what you're looking for in your marriage, is play. You've got your marriage structured properly if you're playing. And you could be playing almost all the time. You could be, and it's like playing when you're a kid. That will come back. Say, except as you become a little child, you will in no wise enter the kingdom of heaven. Right? That is literally, there's nothing metaphorical about that statement. That's what you're aiming at. You're aiming to reattain that state of grace that you occupied when you were a child and you were playing. That's what you're after in your marriage. And so with regard to friendship, I mean, there was a lot of tragedy in the story that you just laid out. Because you said before this relationship that you didn't have play in your relationships. And play also means freedom, right? For a system to have play means that it has some freedom to move, to play, right? So that's also why you want play in your relationship, because then you're not boxing each other in like tyrants. There's some play and some trust. You want to play. And so should your wife be your friend? Yeah, absolutely. Wife first, friend second, right? Because you got, just like with children, right? Parent first, friend second. So you have to have that in order. But if you're operating optimally in relationship to each other, then it's play. And then you think, see, I had a vision of paradise at one point. There were many points in my life, but this was a particularly powerful vision. Paradise is a place where you play forever. And the game just gets better and better, right? And so, and you can think about that as something that's forestalled till the afterlife, let's say, or that's something metaphysical or something ideal. And it is all of those things in some ways, but it's also something that you could, in fact, have here and now. There's another line, I think it's from the Gospel of Thomas. Christ says, "The kingdom of heaven is spread upon the earth, but men do not see it." You see it when you're in love with someone, and you're there when you play, and you can try to be there all the time, and you can be there a lot, and it's a great thing to aim at, And one of the things too, this is useful, and you learn this as a therapist too, is so you might say, well, how do I learn to play with my wife? Okay, here's how. Pretend you don't know anything about yourself or her, because you don't. But just notice that. Well, notice that. You're radically ignorant, and you know that because things aren't perfect for you. So if you weren't radically ignorant, things wouldn't be so awful. So you're ignorant in precise proportion to how miserable you are. That's another way of thinking about it. Okay, so you don't know anything. Now you watch your relationship, and then all of a sudden you'll think, oh, we're getting along right now, and it's fun, it's playful. Then you think, what are we doing right? What am I doing right? How did I bring this about? What are the preconditions for this? Maybe you can even ask your wife, aren't we having fun? What are we doing right? Let's see if we can do that some more. And then maybe to begin with, you're only managing that 1% of the time. Right, but then you notice and you start practicing, and then it's like 2%, and then it's 4%, and who knows how much you can make it. It's probably the case that you're there sometimes. So you got to notice, when are we smiling? When are we laughing? When can I see the young person in my partner? When can I see that emerge? So if Tammy and I are interacting together properly, I can see her at every age I've known her at the same time.
Oh.
Now, see, that's an interesting response. Okay, so that was mostly the women who responded that way.
There are a couple fellas up here.
Okay,
there's a couple savage.
Right? So why, someone out there who responded that way, tell me why you responded that way. Okay. So that's what it reminded you of. Yeah. So she said it's kind of like the Avatar movie where he says, I see you. Mm-hmm. That's right. If you see someone, what do you see when you see someone you love, when you see them with love? That's right. You see, well, I think you see, it's like a revelation of paradise. Mm-hmm. That's really what it is. And you get to see if you have a date that goes right, you remember that you're with the person that you love. You remember that. It's like, oh yes, I remember who you are. You're the person I fell in love with. Where did you go? Well, really, where did that go, right? Because you had it.
Yeah.
Can we bring it back? Well, there's something to strive for, and the answer is yes. You got to look for it. You got to practice it. You got to search for it, right? You got to make it a priority. You mentioned earlier that what should you prioritize in your life? That's what you worship, by the way, what you prioritize. That's why you shouldn't worship money. You need money, as you pointed out, but it shouldn't be your God. It's not a good God. Well, you could prioritize play. You could prioritize love. You could prioritize truth. Those are two good things to prioritize. Love and truth. Prioritize play. If you do that, you'll have plenty of money.
I was just about to say, I found I have more money when I'm more happy.
Oh, yeah,
I have more money when we're playing. I have more financial stability when we're in that space.
If you can play with people, they'll flock to you. Mm-hmm. If you're a businessman and you've got some play in your restaurant, if you're welcoming and hospitable, and it doesn't matter if you're a plumber and you have a sense of humor, and you're a good plumber, that's also helpful. But you know what I mean is that people will want to be around you, and as long as people want to be around you, you're not going to be poor. First of all, one of the ways you're not poor is to have people around you. Right? That's a very reliable way of not being poor. It's like, who cares if you don't have any money if you've got all sorts of people around you? That's wealth. Mm-hmm. But if you've got that play in you, oh my God, people just line up to be around you and never have to worry about money. It'll just come flowing your way like mad. And you think that's naive. It's like, yeah, try it and see. It's not naive at all. It's not easy. I had this friend. He was such a good guy. I don't see him anymore. He got kind of ill and a little bit crazy, and it's really sad. But he was socially such an expert, man. I used to go shopping with him in Montreal. He was an artist. I knew him very well. And he'd walk into a store, any restaurant, and maybe he was just there to pick up something casual, but he always, when the clerk came up to him, he always took a few seconds to notice the person, right? To ask them who they were, and to kind of notice the store, to have a little conversation. None of this was manipulative and none of it was fake. It was completely genuine. And like 10 seconds into the conversation, the clerk would have done absolutely anything for him. And so whenever we went shopping, the person who owned the store always showed us the best things and was really happy to make us a deal, and we had a little adventure, and he was so bloody good at that. It was just something to watch. And I learned to do that from him. It was a real gift to see him do that. He was so good at it. He brought that spirit of play to everything that he did. He was a master at it. Well, he was an artist. He really was an artist. And that flowed out into his whole life. And you can learn to do that with people. It's unbelievably rewarding, and it's great for them too, So play, that's a good one.
We like to play.
Oh, I love to play. It's a great one. I love that very much.
Anything else you want to talk to?
I have a little more serious question, but it leads into the reality when things set in that aren't so playful and joyful, right? Like your family has struggled with health problems and mental health problems and a lot of things, but yet you guys have stayed a bond. You've stayed together as a unit, and that's, unfortunately, it's not as common, when hard things come up, especially that, you see a lot of people fizzle out. Like, what was it that Tammy did that really, held that glue together, or what you did? Like, what did that look like? Because we hear a lot of people, they go through their financial problems, health problems, but it just seems like you guys, really rose through it really, really well.
Well, if you go through rough times, there's no time where trust is more important than when you go through rough times. Mm. And so if you have a history of truthful communication, then you have, and you've also tested yourself then, because if you have a history of truthful communication, you've already solved hard problems because you've already addressed them, and you can do it. And then when a hard problem comes along and it sort of lands on you, then maybe you're ready for it if you're lucky. It's the best shot you have at it anyways. And so, I think part of the reason, I'll tell you a story about Tammy. So she was diagnosed with this terrible rare cancer after being diagnosed with a lesser and curable cancer, which was a mistaken diagnosis. And we went to she had some surgery for that. And then we went to the follow-up. She had quite a bit of pain in her side. And the surgeon said, well, we misread the original biopsy, and it turns out you have this really rare cancer, and it kills everybody in 10 months. And there's no treatment. Surgery won't work, and radiation won't work, chemotherapy won't work. You can try them, but there's no evidence that they'll work. So that's pretty brutal. It's like you got 10 months. It's 100% fatal, and there's no cure. That's rough. That's a bad 10 minutes. And so she took that in stride because she's tough. And a lot of her relatives had died relatively young, and she just kind of thought that was that for her. And she went home and she told Julian and my son. And Tammy is a very good mother. She's not an agreeable person, but she was a very good mother. And Tammy is very good at helping people who need help and telling people who don't need help to go to hell. Right, and knowing the difference. And she was very, very good mother to her children. And she really loved her son and her daughter, and they returned the favor. And when she told Julian, he wasn't happy about it. Deeply not happy about it. He was way less accepting of it than she was. And it's not like he broke down or anything. He's a tough character, my son, and very stable. But she could tell, she knew when she told him that she was going to die, that meant more to him than it did to her. And that was one of the reasons that she decided to fight. She realized that she was more valuable than she thought herself to be. And that changed her life, that little interaction there. And it was also a reward to her in some ways for all the sacrificial love she had devoted to her children. And so why is that an answer to your question? I think part of the reason that Tammy and I survived and that Michaela was able to overcome her terrible health problems. My daughter had rheumatoid arthritis, and she didn't just have rheumatoid arthritis. She had the worst case of rheumatoid arthritis that the Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto had ever seen. And Toronto's a big city, right? It's bigger than Chicago. And so that's no joke. 40 affected joints, long-term prognosis, multiple early joint replacements, And she had her ankle and her hip replaced when she was 15 and 16, and like walked around on 2 broken legs for 2 years, basically. And that was like one of 10 things that were going wrong. One of the reasons we got through all of that was because we actually loved each other. We actually wanted the other person around. You think, well, of course you want your wife around. It's like, really, do you? Of course. You're so sure about that, are you? There's not a part of you that thinks, well, if she died, I could start over with a new person. I'd be free finally. And maybe only 10% of you thinks that. But maybe when the chips are down, that's the 10% that kills you. And I'm not saying that people die of cancer or anything else because their relationships aren't intact. I'm not saying that. I'm not trying to blame the victims. I'm just saying that, there may come a time in your life where you're in such crisis that any goddamn mistake that you're carrying along with you is going to be fatal. And that could easily happen. And in fact, it probably will. And so that's all the more reason to iron out the wrinkles in your relationship. Because it might be the difference between life and death, or even worse, it might be the difference between life and hell. So it helped, and I knew I wanted Tammy around. Her children wanted her around, even more than she wanted herself around. And that was true for all of us, and that was definitely helpful. We got prayers from people from all around the world. That didn't hurt. My sister printed them out in all sorts of colors and put them on Tammy's hospital wall. That was helpful. Does prayer work? I don't know. Doesn't hurt people to know that the community's rooting for them. God only knows what's going to tilt you in the direction of living if it's touch and go. So truth helped, love helped, community support helped. The doctors helped. Yeah.
Thanks. That's awesome.
This has been quite the adventure today. Thank you.
Lucky us.
Lucky us. Thank you. Before we let you go, what's the website again where we took the test? Because you guys got to take the test. Everybody take the test tonight.
Understandmyself.com.
Understandmyself.com. Go take the test.
Yeah. The other one is self-authoring, SELF authoring. Write your own story. Here's the rule. You can either be the main player in your own drama, or you can be the bit player in someone else's. Those are your options. And that someone else may well be someone who doesn't have your best interest in mind. So you either write your own destiny or something else will write it for you. And so if you really understand that, I learned that from Carl Jung. He said, we all live out a story, and yours might be a hellish tragedy. It's like, is that what you want? If not, you probably want to formulate an alternative. So self-authoring helps with that. We found with university students, if kids spent 90 minutes laying out a vision at the beginning of the semester, they were 40% less likely to drop out in the first year. That's all they needed. All they needed was to sit down and think, well, why are you going to university? As far as you're concerned, right? What's in it for you? And I don't mean that in the narrow, selfish sense. It's like, do you have a plan here? Here's another rule. No aim, no positive emotion. Positive emotion occurs in relationship to an aim. Technically, that's how it works. That's what the system does. A positive emotion signals to you that you're moving towards a valued goal. So that means you don't have a goal, you have no positive emotion, no hope, no forward movement, no enthusiasm, no joy. And so there's a corollary to that too, which is so cool. The higher the aim, the more joy you feel when you see yourself moving towards it. So why do you aim at something transcendent and ultimate? Well, because that's the best possible goal. So that's just, there's nothing about that isn't true,
So good.
Thank you.
You bet.
Guys, Jordan Peterson. I didn't think we'd be dancing today. Thank you very much.
You bet, man.
Thank you. Thank you.